Hello everyone, my name is Amit, and in this video with Aisha, we are going to discuss communalism. Communalism as a subject or as a topic has been mentioned in your GS Mains Paper 1 syllabus under the subheading of Indian Society. If you carefully look at the section of Indian Society or the section of the syllabus of Indian Society as has been enumerated by UPSC, it specifically talks of three interrelated topics of communalism, regionalism and secularism. Two aspects which comes forward for us to discuss. Number one, why is UPSC so much concerned about communalism? And number two, how to approach it. First aspect first, that is why UPSC is taking up this issue. Well, there is a rising debate about the rise in tendencies of communalism, or rise in communal tendencies rather, in Indian society. A section of the academia, they are debating that the undercurrent of communalism is sabotaging the secular fabric or the secular nature of Indian society. So is communalism a new phenomena to Indian society or Indian scenario? Or is it something which is going on since ages, going on since long? And is it new altogether? And then comes how to approach it as an academic topic. Clear? While approaching it, the answer of the first aspect, that whether it has been there since long or not, it will be clear within our discussion only. So I'm not approaching that separately. As for the approach, the academic approach to the topic of communalism, let's first try to understand what is communalism. If we look at the dictionaries, the English dictionaries, whether Oxford or Cambridge, they give us a definition, say, of a narrow and selfish group identity. They say that communalism is nothing but a narrow and selfish group identity. But it's really confusing. The definition of regionalism is also somewhere related to this concept, narrow and selfish group identity. Then, is communalism and regionalism, are they both similar in nature? Are they the two sides of the same coin? In India, the way we understand communalism, well, it's grossly different from regionalism. What makes it different? Primarily, three aspects which characterize this group identity, this concept of group identity. They differentiate communalism from regionalism. These are, number one, the historical basis of looking at the group identity. The same group identity we were talking about in the dictionary given definition of narrow and selfish group identity. I'm talking about that only. So if that group identity is coming out of historical basis, say historically one group of people, they have been living at one particular place, they start associating themselves to be a part of the same community. Here, similarly comes the religious basis, people of same religion. Similarly, the last one is the ethnicity basis or ethnic identity. Okay, say the people of same ethnicity, say I belong to one particular tribe, so people of my tribe, people of the same ethnicity, I would start relating myself to that group only. Okay, so here lies, or it can be discussed in respect to caste as well. Okay, so in this particular discussion, or in these three bases, there lies the basic concept of communalism. That yes, it is the narrow and selfish group identity, but here the group identity emerges out of these three bases. Now the question is, that means there would be different types of communalism in the society? Well, no. If we look at communalism, it may emerge out of any of the three bases, but it will be having three common features. Say for example, there would be an extremely weak bond between the members of the various societies. So the first common feature would be weak bond between members of different communities. Then there would also be a kind of ethnic dissatisfaction, that we, the people of this particular grouping, we have not been provided for sufficiently. This particular sense would also be there. And lastly, the most important phenomena or the most important feature of communalism would be that we have been deprived or we have not been provided for because we belong to this particular group. This tendency. So the next two are B, the feature of ethnic dissatisfaction, and lastly, that sense that yes, we have been deprived, but we have been deprived because we belong to this community. That sense. Now, question is how and when these communal tendencies they started emerging in Indian scenario. Were they there always? Well, India has been a land of a number of religions. Hinduism or Sanatan Dharma has been practiced in this country, God knows since when. It is a typical ahistoric religion. Its time scale is not found. Since when this particular aspect? Then comes the emergence of Buddhism and Jainism, Sikhism. Islam came to India practically in 629 AD. The first mosque that was established in India was not after the attack by the Arab invaders or the Turkish Ottoman Empire on the kingdom of Dahir at the west of India, but it happened in 629 AD. By the time Prophet Muhammad was alive, one Muslim Arab trader came to the Keralite coast. The king of Travancore, he got very much influenced or very much impressed by the idea of Islam. He asked the Arab trader to ask for permission from Prophet Muhammad, and the Cheraman Juma Mosque, the first mosque in India, was established on the Keralite coast or Kerala coast. So Islam came to India back in 629 AD. Simultaneously, Christianity also came in India in the first millennium only. One of the 12 main disciples or one of the 12 primary disciples of Jesus Christ, St. Thomas, came to India, and it was him only who propagated Christianity in India. His grave is there, still there in Tamil Nadu. So from this discussion only, you can understand that India has been the cradle of various world religions. The basic principle of Sarva Dharma Samobhava, the Neo-Vedantic principle which was it was found in the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, which was explicitly stated by Gandhiji, this particular concept of Sarva Dharma Samobhava, this has been practiced in our country since ages. So I cannot say that people of my country, they have been communal from the very beginning. No, they must not have been. Then, since when this communal tendencies they started emerging in the Indian scenario? The answer lies in the British administrative approaches. Yes, I have to admit in between that a number of rulers in my country, they tried to use religion as a tool to perpetuate their authority over the society. No doubt, there are a number of such examples where the rulers, they used religion. But still, they were the rulers who were using religion as a tool. The common people, they grossly have been secular. they never adopted any communal tendency, or they never adopted a communal sentiment as such. But it was this secular tendency or the secular fabric within the society which prompted the British to adopt the policy of divide and rule. The triggering of this happened with the revolt of 1857. During the revolt of 1857, there were practically 42,000 only, 42,000 British soldiers in India. British soldiers of East India Company. As against this, nearly 5 lakh Indian sepoys were there. From this figure alone, you can understand the panic that cropped among the British administrators, that if they have to rule India, they cannot allow the people of India to remain united. They have to break them in as many perspectives as possible, whether on religious lines, on caste lines, on racial lines, whichever way possible. And it was with this objective that they introduced the policy of divide and rule. Now, why am I saying that the revolt of 1857 made them press the panic button? If we look at the revolt of 1857 very closely, we would see that yes, no doubt the revolt it affected somewhat around 1/4 of the geographical region of the country. Say for example, it started from Delhi on the west, the Kumaon Garhwal region on the north, Ara, Bihar in the east, and Gwalior in the south. It never went below Gwalior. So practically this was the geographic area between which the revolt took place. Okay. Now let's look at the leaders of the revolt and their relationship with their people. In Delhi, Bahadur Shah Zafar was a titular head, to be very honest. Actual leadership lied with General Bakht Khan. And General Bakht Khan had the strong support of the Hindu sepoys who revolted in Meerut cantonment. So, Bakht Khan was a Muslim, but his primary support base was the Hindu sepoys. Let's come to a little bit of east, southeast to be more precise, Jhansi. Okay, the leadership lied with Rani Lakshmi Bai. Her main support was the Pathan cavalry. Let's go a little bit more towards the west, Kanpur. The elder brother of Rani Lakshmi Bai, Nana Sahab. His primary supporters were Tatia Topi and Azimullah Khan. Nana Sahab may have had spent his time in his garden and lived his life that way if Azimullah Khan had not pushed his master to unfurl the banner of revolt. He was the primary mastermind behind the revolt, who pushed, he and Tatia Topi, they actually made Nana Sahab to go forward. Let's move a little bit more towards the east, Lucknow. Begum Hajrat Mahal. She was fighting for the right of her 4-year-old son, Birjis Kadri. Her primary support base was the Hindu Talukdars of Awadh. Okay? Yes, in between there was Maulvi Ahmadullah in Barelvi or Bareli, Rao Tularam, so many of the leaders. Now let's come to Ara, the easternmost point, Kunwar Singh. It was Kunwar Singh who was leading the revolt in Ara, and his main support base were the Pathan soldiers, Pathans of Bihar. Okay, so if we look at the whole picture of the revolt of 1857, here itself we see that bonhomie between Hindu and Muslim community. It was this particular aspect, the bonhomie between the two community, which made the British realize that if they have to rule India, they have to divide them. Okay. So, practically speaking, immediately after the revolt of 1857, the British, they adopted the policy of divide and rule and started dividing Indian society in as many parts as possible. It was a typical administrative decision and administrative effort that they took. Let's see how. See, in our discussion only, you can see that the revolt, both Hindus and Muslims, they orchestrated together. They orchestrated this revolt together. But the blame of the revolt was squarely put on the Muslims by the British. They made it a point that it was the Muslims who caused and created this revolt. And they started a policy of oppression of the Muslims and promoting the interest of the Hindus and other religious groups in government jobs, in enjoying the fruits of the modern education, Western education that they introduced in India. Yes, no doubt. They introduced the Western education in India with the sole objective of creating babus, the clerks, so that the clerks, they may help them in furthering their exploitation of the subcontinent. But the intellectual elite in India, they got the better hand. With this Western education, they got exposed to the concepts of liberty, equality, nationalism, which were emerging in the West. And they brought those concepts in the Indian scenario. Result, within a few years, within 20 years practically, we saw that whether the Hindus, Parsis or otherwise, they started getting in a position of prominence in Indian society. Say for example, Dadabhai Nauroji, he got elected in the British House of Commons. Just think, an Indian getting elected in British House of Commons. Then comes Surendranath Tagore, the first person to be selected in ICS, Indian Civil Services. Surendranath Banerjee, the second one. Though Surendranath Banerjee had to leave Indian Civil Services because there was some confusion with his age, what he did in turn? He started creating or giving shape to the political organizations in India. And by 1883, we know that he formed the Indian National Conference. It was the merger of Indian National Conference with Indian National Congress which provided Congress that mass base. So the base was more with Indian National Conference than with Indian National Congress. But in the initial year, in the first year. However, so here you can understand how the social currents they were moving. So the Indian intellectual elite, they already started mobilizing the masses and started raising voice against the British rule in India. Yes, in a moderate way, true, but they started doing that. Okay. The moment this happened, the British realized that the time has come to prop up the Muslims against the so-called emerging communities. And I have to admit that we Indians, we also provided them an ample ground for that, an ample opportunity for that. Certain reactionary sections within the Hindu society or other societies, they provided them this opportunity. Say for example, Hindu Mahasabha on one hand. Similarly, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who had a spotless career as a judge within the British judiciary, within the British Indian judiciary, he allowed himself to a certain extent to be used by the British, to be used as an agent to forward their agenda of divide and rule, just to secure some advantages for his section of the community. And all these I have to admit, Aligarh movement, when it was conceptualized, he came out with Aligarh movement, it was primarily secular. But in the latter part, he allowed himself to be used. So somehow these blames, they do come against him. At the same time, when all these things were going on, let's see how the various facets of communalism were introduced in India. By facets of communalism, we mean the phases of communalism. Normally, if we see the rise of communal tendencies in a society, they come in three phases. The first phase is the emergence of the notion that we are not the same, we are not brothers, we are different. That is the rise of communal identity, the first phase of the rise of communalism. Okay? So, the first phase is rise in communal identity. This was done by the British in 1856 only. 1857 rather. How? The moment they started distinguishing between the Muslims and Hindus and other sections of the religion or other religious sections of the society. So it was there itself that they gave the communal identity to these particular groups. That no, you're not the same. By 1876 comes the second phase, the moderate phase of communalism. In the moderate phase of communalism, along with the notion of difference in identity, also comes the notion that the interests of the different sections are also different. Say there is one section A and one section B. At first, they would come to know or they would come to realize that they are not the same. Then they would come to realize that their interests are also not the same. Their interests are also different. That's the phase of moderate communalism. The second phase. And lastly comes the notion that not only the interests are different, but they are also antagonistic. That means they are also against each other. That's the extreme form of communalism. Okay? So the three phases of communalism. Now let's see how they happened. The extreme form of communalism didn't emerge in Indian scenario naturally. Normally it doesn't take much time for the conversion from moderate phase of or moderate form of communalism towards extreme form of communalism. But the secular undercurrent within Indian society didn't allow this to happen. Result? 1905, for the first time we saw the British interfering in this scenario. How? Partition of Bengal. Just imagine that the Viceroy of the nation went to Dhaka and gave a statement that I'm gifting you a Muslim majority province to secure the political interests of the Muslims. A dosage, the dosage of communal tendencies or the dosage to promote the extreme form of communalism, that starts there. 1907 we saw reactionary elements like Nawab Salimullah of Dhaka and others, they were propped up and Muslim League was formed. Okay? They went and made the Viceroy, gave petition to the Viceroy. Result, in 1909, now try to understand, the Muslim League, when it was formed, it was not having a mass base, no. Still, on the petition of Muslim League, in 1909, during parliamentary reforms, separate electorate, the concept of separate electorate was introduced. Starts appeasement politics. Appeasement by the British of one particular section. Why? Because now for them, this creation of separate or the extreme form of communalism is extremely necessary so that they can use them against each other. Okay. It didn't stop there. In 1911, they had to annul the partition of Bengal. The moment partition of Bengal was annulled, the capital was shifted from Calcutta to Delhi. Why? Because Delhi was already symbolized by the British as the epicenter of Muslim rule in India. Now, point is, Delhi was established by the Tomar Rajputs, which then passed on in the hands of Prithviraj Chauhan, Hindus. But no, it was the British who gave or who symbolized Delhi as the center of Muslim rule in India. And just to further that interest of promoting extreme form of communalism, they did this as a measure to appease the Muslims. Okay. See how the British, they went forward with this tendency. Then by the end of 1920s, 1928-29 around, the All India Muslim Personal Law Board that was formed, and the Muslim personal law was introduced as a separate set of law in India. All the other communities, they have one single set of law, but a separate set of law was promoted for the Muslims only. The way they carried forward, it shows a distinct pattern of trying to separate the two communities. And their intention becomes very clear when they used, or they tried to use, the Hindu Garhwal regiment just to quash the non-violent movement of the Red Shirts or Khudai Khidmat Guards in Northwest Frontier Province. We know in Northwest Frontier Province, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the Frontier Gandhi, he was carrying forward a non-violent movement in adherence to the principles of Gandhiji. The British, they sent the Hindu Garhwal regiment to open fire on them. Why? Because they by this time had the idea that we have been successfully differentiated the two communities, Hindus and Muslims. Now they can fight between each other. So, say for example, the Hindus, they create some problem, there would be the Muslims and the Sikh to deal with the Hindus. The Muslims, they create some problem, there would be the Hindus, the Sikhs to deal with the Muslims. The Sikh people, they do some problem, they create some problem, there would be the Hindus and the Muslims to deal with that. That's how they were playing. And this particular idea, how it consolidated in the form of extreme form of communalism in Indian scenario, that can be seen by 1937 with the rise of the two-nation theory, where Muslim League came out with the idea that Muslims and Hindus or other sections of the religious society, they are so different that they cannot live together. They are two nations unto themselves. Their interests are so different that they are actually against each other. It was on the basis of this idea that in 1940, the demand for Pakistan was raised and Muslim League went forward with the Direct Action Day. So you can understand it with this particular discussion only that the policy of communalism has been inculcated in Indian society for 90 long years by the British. And we can distinctly see the three different phases of communalism which they tried to promote. Okay. Now, this religious difference was not the only form of difference that they created. They also tried to divide the society on the caste basis. I have to admit, it's us only who gave them this opportunity, but they used it. How? Say, for example, the way they picturized the Peshwa rule in Maratha Padbadshahi, Hindu Padbadshahi, that as if that rule was a rule only by the upper caste Hindus. And it was with this concept that they pulled in the lower caste people in their army and went for the war with Marathas. This time, the Bhima Koregaon incident that happened, it was actually the 200th anniversary of the Second Anglo-Maratha War. Okay, so they also, this is one typical example how they also used the caste sentiments to create differences between the Hindus, the upper caste Hindus and the lower caste Hindus. You can also understand their intention in coming out with the communal award after 1932, after the third round table conference, where they tried to bring in separate electorate even for the scheduled castes today, the so-called oppressed castes in India. Now, it was actually the effort of Gandhiji and B.R. Ambedkar, which because they realized the British pattern and they understood that if they allow this tendency to go on, it would be very difficult to reconcile even the Hindus who are getting divided on the caste lines in the coming days. So it was practically because of their effort that the caste basis division didn't happen in India, or it didn't went to this particular extent. Okay. Similarly, they also tried to create the racist division. How? Martial races and others. This way, they tried to use every possible tool that was available in their hand. Now we have to understand this was an administrative decision by the British, or an administrative effort by them to perpetuate their rule. Point is, the ill that was inculcated, or the seed that was inculcated in my society for 90 long years cannot be done away with in 71 years. So yes, traces of communalism that still exist in my society. And obviously it is far more easier to deteriorate a situation than to improve it. So if this situation has been deteriorated for 90 long years, it will take far more longer period to improve this condition. We have to work in a patient way to improve it. The government is no doubt taking efforts in that direction, and things will improve in the coming days. But it will take time. For that, we have to have patience. Clear? Now comes the last aspect. In our common discussion, we very easily confuse between religiosity or religiousness and communalism. Are they two just the same? No, they are not. Religiosity or religiousness has got nothing to do with communalism. Religion forms one of the basic aspects of the identity of a human being. Okay, but being religious means it's something personal, having your relationship with the God, with the Almighty. So being religious is not something which normally affects your public life, or which normally affects your public approach. The moment your public approach or your approach towards others gets influenced by the narrow and selfish group identity, there you become communal. There's nothing wrong in being religious. Okay, but yes, there is problem in being communal. Because the moment you're being communal, you're trying to promote the narrow and selfish group identity, or the narrow and selfish group interest. Clear? So this particular notion has got nothing to do with being religious. Clear? Why I discuss this last phase? Because the tendency of UPSC asking questions, from this section we have seen only one question being asked till now. That was asked in 2017. Till now 5 mains have taken place, 13, 14, 15, 16 and 17. In 17 only they asked one question where they asked that distinguish between religiousness and communalism, giving one example of how the former has got transformed into the latter in independent India. Yes, this happened in independent India because we confuse between religiousness or religiosity